It's the 14th of November, 2023, Pinot Pixel podcast with another fancy, cool, interesting episode. Today I invited Mathias Winter Petersen, and this is not really accidentally made. It's World Kindness Day, and he's one of the kindest persons I know, and he knows a shitload of stuff about natural winemaking, low intervention wines, and what comes along with all that stuff. And we thought it might be a good idea to have a chat about it and try to give you an approach on how you can get deeper into this topic, what is really correct and what might be difficult to say, to do, whatever. So enjoy this episode with Mathias. We have a lot of stuff to share with you, and you will have a different view on natural wines after this episode, I'm pretty sure. Enjoy. Welcome to the Pinot Pixel podcast episode number 105. Today I have a very special guest, a very good friend of mine, Mathias Winter Petersen from Denmark. He's, in my opinion, the absolute expert on tasting natural wines, and we would like to talk about what natural really means. Is there a definition of it? What is or what could be a definition or an explanation? And yes, I'm really happy to have you here. Thanks for coming.
Hello, Alex. Thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. We spent some days on wine fairs here and there, and then we decided to have a podcast together. And right now, let's start with your experience. You have been working in the wine business for quite a while.
Yes.
And in working with natural wines, working with commercial wines. So what is your... Let's talk about you, for example, at first.
Okay, so I think my wine interest grew while working. I worked at in a premium supermarket back in Copenhagen for I would say 10 years or something.
Okay.
So during the last 5-6 years, my interest in wine grew, and it was a lot of everyday wines for everyday people. Even though it was a premium supermarket, we had something for everybody's taste. Then I slowly began working more and more into the what you would call natural wine kind of business, and I worked for several importers of natural wine. I worked in a wine bar, a couple of wine bars, and today I teach wine classes
With all kinds of wine.
with all kinds of wine.
Okay.
Yeah, so and that's maybe what we're going to talk about. I really don't appreciate this kind of polarizing or division of natural wine and, let's say, conventional wine. But maybe that's a subject for later. I don't know.
We can try to maybe not differentiate, but try to find a definition of what it means having conventional wines and natural wines.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
So if you just read the books, it says it divides in several categories. So you have like conventional wine is a category of wine I think most of people are familiar with. So it's the wine where you are able to spray with pesticides, fungicides. You're doing that in every step of the winemaking and wine growing process.
Just like every agricultural product in the end.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And you do that to avoid several diseases or pests or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have organic products, like buying an organic cucumber. Then it's like buying an organic wine. So you cannot spray with non-organic products.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have biodynamic products, which is again like biodynamic agriculture in general, where you follow several. You have preparations. So I think there's a preparation called 501, 502, or whatever. And you follow these principles originally written down by Rudolf Steiner, for instance, and Maria Thun with the moon calendar and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about, we need another podcast for that.
But maybe one or two sentences to that, because people often think that biodynamic is this esoteric thing.
Yeah.
But actually there is a scientific part of it, and then there is this more esoteric part.
Yeah. And I think many people, they are turned off by this. Oh, we pick our grapes while the stars are in the right places in the skies. We have farming animals, and we dig their shit into cow, whatever they're called,
Yeah.
and dig them into the ground, and then 2 months later we put them up, we put it in a bowl of water, and we turn it the opposite direction, and then the opposite of the opposite, and then we
Yes.
spray it like a fertilizing element.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I get why people think that this is bullshit, but I think it has been shown that people who work biodynamically, for instance, whether they're certified or not, because that's another thing we need to talk about, these certifications. The result usually is that these vignerons, these wine growers, they tend to use and dedicate more time in the vineyards.
So higher quality in the vineyard and closer to nature.
Exactly. Yeah. And this is what I learn every time I visit a producer of what I would say high quality wine. He or she says that, as long as I have healthy grapes, I can make good wine. It's like eating Italian food. They have 3 ingredients. It's olive oil, tomatoes, and garlic. To put it just very
Yes, on point.
But they care so much about the quality of these 3 ingredients, so you can make a very, very good meal out of these ingredients as long as the raw material is of high quality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to me, I talked about this every now and then in the podcast. The best visits at wineries were the people who just said, "You have seen so many cellars. Let's go outside. Let's have a look in the vineyard. I show you where the quality comes from." And in the end, they just try to keep the quality in the cellar, but not try to make something out of it because they have just crappy grapes, whatever. So we have this, let's say, 3 different streams. So conventional, organic, biodynamic.
Right.
With or without certification, it doesn't matter. But this is generally how you can divide it.
Can I just say something?
Yeah, sure,
also to
please.
that? Because if we're talking about other agricultural products like a cucumber, if it's organic, then you have the certification, of course. So when you buy a cucumber and it has here in the EU, it has this kind of the organic leaf.
The EU label.
So it's organic. It's the same thing with wine. It has the same logo if they're certified organic. But it's another discussion that producers also tend to be working organically, but not necessarily certified.
Mm-hmm.
And that's I think that's important to just to discuss that some of the very, very best producers in my mind, they're not certified anything, because with the certification there comes a lot of other things to consider, and a lot of bureaucracy. It costs money. You have several visits from the government to control, which is great, of course. But many winemakers, especially in Italy, they don't want to deal with these kinds of things.
So you think this is the main reason why several people are not certified?
I think it's one of the reasons, yeah, definitely. Also, of course, if we look at it more, cynically, producers, they don't want to be, what do you call it? Regulated. So
between borders.
Yeah,
Okay.
in 1 year maybe they really need to spray something, then they don't want to be regulated, saying that they can't because they have the certification, otherwise they will lose the certification or whatever. So I think there's a bunch of reasons to certify or not. Mm-hmm. But in the end, for the consumer, of course, I think we should, go for the certifications, because how on earth should we otherwise know what kind of products we're buying?
You should talk to the people then, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And really interesting thing, because you mentioned it, I know several people who work organically, but they say, thinking of sustainability, I would keep my right to spray in a very difficult year, because I'd rather risk the certification for 1 year instead of losing my whole business and running out of business. So it's also economically sustainable to think like that, and sometimes it doesn't work under the head of certification.
Yeah, and it's also a very practical example, right? So it's not like it's difficult to talk about either there are certifications or there are non-certifications. It's also like everything else in life, it's all in between also.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's an interesting topic. Yeah.
Okay, so let's say, okay, this is the general approach to differentiating between the working, the farming. There is no definition for natural wines, but people use it, and it's quite easy in marketing to say this is natural wine. How would you try to find a description for it?
Yeah, so when we're talking about conventional, organic, or biodynamic wine, to me, and to what is known now, we talk mostly about what happens in the vineyard. So if you look at it like you have all the work in the vineyard, and then you have the work in the cellar where the wine is produced or the vinification takes place, right? So you can work conventionally, organically, or biodynamically in the vineyards. But then when you come to the cellar to vinify your wine, you can polish it and you can add several things to the wine, acid, sugar. You can do all kinds of intervention, right? So when we're talking about the definition of natural wine, which doesn't exist momentarily, but I think most people agree that they take this biodynamic or organic approach with them to the cellar. And it's about most natural wine. We agree that it is made of either organically or biodynamically produced grapes. And when they come to the cellar, there's low intervention, or there is non-intervention. So, for instance, sulfur is a big subject, right? Sulfur, which is a preservation, comes in powder or liquids or whatever gas form. You add to your wine. Conventionally produced wines, they have been added. They add sulfur to the wines just during the whole process, every step. Whenever they rack the wine, they add a little sulfur. Before fermentation, after fermentation, they add sulfur. Before bottling, whatever.
Just to be super safe and super stable.
Yeah, and this has been standard procedure since the industrialization, right? But the thing is, before this industrialization, we didn't have access to these kinds of additives. So natural winemaking is actually, to me, just a back to the roots kind of approach, where you don't add sulfur.
So original winemaking would be a better expression?
Yeah, for instance. What was the question again? Sorry. So
try
to define natural wine. So you actually try to intervene less, or to intervene not at all. But talking about natural wine, in some people's minds, they think of maybe grapes just falling to the ground by themselves.
Fermenting,
vinifying themselves. No, people have always intervened, So I would like to talk about good wine, because today I think, and I know that by talking to several producers of both conventionally produced wines, if we talk about that, and natural produced wines, they all agree that the good work starts in the vineyard. So if you take care of your grapes, you have healthy grapes in the end, then you actually don't have to intervene so much as you would if you made, think of a bottle in the supermarket for €3.50 or something. Those grapes before, 10 years ago, they were so in such a bad condition that you had to add several additives. You had to intervene and to polish the product, right? Also, because if you're producing 2 million bottles a year, you have to have a consistent product, which is very important in this kind of market. But actually, producers of these wines today, they agree that if you start working in the vineyards, you're taking care of your grapes. It takes a lot more time and dedication. But if you do that, then you can actually you still intervene in these kind of wines, but you can actually it's all about the raw material. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I think the two, we have two poles right now. We have conventional wines and natural wines, but I think that the two, they have influenced each other. So if maybe I'm going a little bit far ahead now,
Go for it.
But just a couple of years ago, many of the so-called natural wines, they could taste the vinegar, or they could be oxidized, or they could be mousy, or whatever, have several faults. They have learned how to make proper wines naturally, but they still taste traditionally and classic. Just as the producers of conventional wines, they've actually learned to minimize the use of sulfur, so they don't just do it by procedure. Yeah, they do it to the amount that they find necessary.
Yes.
Because they found out that, okay, wines can actually be preserved in natural ways. This is a longer discussion, but if you have grapes with low pH, meaning often high acidity, then that's a preserving item, right? If you make many producers of white wine today, they macerate the white just on the skins for a couple of hours to a couple of days, just to protect. It doesn't make them orange wines, but there are actually antioxidants in the skins, so they can preserve the wines that way. That's another natural way of preserving the wine. So you can minimize the use of sulfates.
And we talked about this 2 days ago, that most people don't know that one of the biggest and most famous companies in the world with the most well-known wines and the most expensive wines, they work organically or even biodynamically, like Romanée Conti or Ponticane, or just producers like that, and they got used to it, and it's possible even in bigger charges and bigger numbers.
Exactly, and so when we're talking about high quality wines, I don't care if they call it natural wines or conventional wines. Most agree on the same principles. You have to have good raw material, then you don't have to polish your wines, right? And I think another interesting subject is, we talked about what differences conventional wines from organic wines, from biodynamic wines, from natural wines. So you talked about marketing your products. When you in the supermarket, for instance, and you pick a bottle which has the biodynamic certification, for instance, let's say from Demeter,
yeah.
which is very, very, it's well known today. People who are not in, they don't work with wine. How on earth should they know that this is not a good product? It's biodynamically certified. Because they also, producers tend to, they have caught this, they know that there's a market now for organically grown wines or biodynamically produced wines. So they certified themselves, they
Got certified.
They got certified biodynamically, but that doesn't say, sorry to say it, shit about what happens in the cellar.
Yes.
So you can be a biodynamic producer of wines, but because most of the regulations in the biodynamics, they tend to focus on the vineyard works. They tend not to focus on what happens in the cellar. They're very, very badly made wines, because once they come into the cellar,
it's like
it's like a fabricated product, right?
Yeah.
So it's a tough world to navigate in, and I understand why consumers, they cannot find their way out.
What would you answer to a person that comes to you, for example, in one of your wine seminars and saying, I don't like natural wines? What do you say to them?
Usually I'm very curious about what is it that they don't like. So
the stinky stuff and unfiltered and hazy.
Exactly, and it smells like vinegar or it's oxidized.
What do you answer me then?
Well, normally, because on my courses, whether it's about the theme natural wine or just introduction to tasting wines or something, I tend to choose wines which are made in after my philosophy, which
So high quality in the
high
vineyard.
quality in the vineyards, less additives in the cellar, right? And then I pour a wine, because natural wine today is not what it was like 10 years ago. Then I pour them the wine, and they think, wow, this is just a very good wine. It tastes classic. It has all of these. It lives up to all of these. So it reminds them of a classic wine. And then I say to them, this is actually made naturally
So low
because
intent.
it's unfiltered, it's unfined. It's made of organically or biodynamically grown grapes because most of the good producers, they tend to work like this, certified or not. And it's been it's been exposed to less new oak. That's another thing we could talk about. What are the approaches in the aging processes? So it doesn't have to be stinky or to be mousy or doesn't have to smell of barnyard or whatever. Was that answer to your question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there is several approaches to a definition of this kind of wine style, say it like this. And what I really liked is Eberhard Spangberg from Garibaldi once told me that he tries to describe it as crafted wines and made wines. Yeah, so craft is you bring your craft into it. You're the farmer who tries to produce high quality products and bring it to the cellar and then just try to keep the quality. And made wines are the polished wines. I talked about in one of my podcasts, I also told you the story about this harvest in England where they just harvested everything. And he said, yeah, 5% of shit is fine because we have enzymes like this. And this could be an approach. And there is this peer group for those kind of wines.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And it's never black and white. So, but I think an important point is that many producers today of, let's say, fabricated wines or made wines, as you put it, they're actually made of the best raw material possible for the producer. So the focus has been shifted to be now very much on how can we get good grapes. And whether you believe it or not, you get good grapes by working a lot in the vineyards. You dedicate your time, and that's why these wines tend to be more expensive. Yeah.
What do you think how they carry the risk of not having enough grapes or healthy grapes in 1 year?
If they don't spray?
If they don't spray?
Yeah. I think it's, that's why we see a natural wine producer, they tend to be relatively small in size. So of course it's way more risky work to do. But studies have just shown that if you're spraying your vineyards year after year, the vineyards, the plants, they tend to be addicted from this spraying. So their own protection, their own defense system, is completely broken down because they rely so much on these pesticides.
It's like being addicted to penicillin.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
So
aspirin,
so the more you spray, the more they get addicted to this shit, and then if you suddenly, then it's a bad circle,
What would you recommend a winery, a company, or just people working like this, how to market their products? Because using the term natural wines seems a bit not overvalued, but used a lot, overrated maybe probably, or just used too often and burned. So what would you recommend?
Well, first of all, I'm all for certifications. So I think certifications are important. I just went to a panel discussion a couple of weeks ago about so the name of the discussion was, does natural wine need protection? And by that they meant certification.
So the term natural wine needs protection.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And do we need some sort of a certification? And I think from a consumer point of view, I think certifications are so important because how can we even talk about natural wine if we're not agreeing on what it is? And it's we people who work in wine, we're used to navigate through these different kind of we know that, okay, we have to know the producer to know how he or she is working, but the average consumer would not have an idea of this. So I think it's very. I have a lot of respect for producers who seek the certifications of organic or biodynamic, but to me, it doesn't mean so much if they don't, take the same step in the cellar. So I'm all in for a certification of some sort of natural wine, as a certification of how you should work in the cellar and what you can add. And it takes me to another discussion about, so why is wine the only product where we don't need an ingredients list?
Oh, that will change in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. So okay.
Took a long time.
Yeah. Tell more about that.
I mean, the EU introduced this rule to just put nutrient list and ingredient list on wine.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the 8th of December.
Yeah.
People still arguing. Oh no, this could not be, and this takes the romance out of wine business and stuff.
Yeah, but let me say something. It's not romantic to make wine. It's
It's
difficult
not.
wet work in your rubber boots.
Yes.
So
Yes, and you even use the rubber boots to crush the wines every now and then. Yes.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah, and this is, I mean, it's an agricultural product, and
But I think the most important thing to remember is that producers from a big scale to producers on a very low scale, they tend to actually today work on the same thing to get healthy grapes, and I think that's very, very important. So it's not. Let's talk about good wine. Okay, good wine can be mass produced today. You can get a very, very, very well made wine for, let's say, €8.
€8, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe you don't get a personal wine. You don't get a wine that is very distinct in its taste or its profile, because it's in this price range. It's of course a
The
consumer
time you
product,
spend.
mass product. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the quality, just the standard has just been raised. The bar has been raised, I think.
And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
People struggle to raise their prices accordingly, but this would be the next step.
And I think it's because of the work in the vineyards. Most producers today, from big to small, they agree that the work starts in the vineyards.
I would love to end this conversation with what would be 2 or 3 questions you could give me as a normal, just a wine lover, coming to a winery, a vineyard, to figure out how they work. What can I ask you as a winemaker to get this? This might be a guy or a girl who's focused on quality.
Can you rephrase that? I'm not sure what.
How do I find out in a winery that they work in this kind of philosophy?
Okay, so the questions I usually ask a producer is, so in the vineyards, if you take a look in the vineyard, you can take a look in the vineyards. If there's a life in the vineyards, if there's they don't cut
Bugs,
the grass, there are
bees.
bees, insects. Usually that's a good sign to me, because that means it's a living environment, right? Yeah. So if you spray your vineyards constantly, you have a very, very, sorry to say it, you have a dead environment.
Dev environment, yeah.
So I usually ask, okay, so how do you work? And they usually say, we work organically. Maybe we are organically certified, or we work after organic principles. And without the certification, of course, you cannot be 100% sure. But then that's why you visit your winemakers. And then they might say something about, so we do spray a little bit cover and sulfur, which is allowed in, I think, also biodynamic production.
I think.
And then I ask, okay, and then when the grapes arrive in the cellar, how do you process them? Then they say, we add a little bit sulfites before fermentation. We use the yeast and the natural yeast, the indigenous yeast on the grapes in the wine cellar. This is another big topic, I think. Most producers today, most of the good quality-minded producers, they tend to work on the natural yeasts. So this thing we've been told about cultured yeast, I think, it's I don't buy it.
And it's just 50 or 60 years old.
Yeah.
Beforehand, everything was just fermented naturally.
Yeah, exactly. And so of course I get it if you have to produce a very distinct type of wine and it has to be consistent and you want to enhance some aromas. Let's take an example, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc from Marlborough.
I got this in my mind.
Yeah, they have to work with this special yeast to accent the aromas of I don't know, gooseberry or elderflower or whatever.
And to meet the expectations of the clients.
Yeah, exactly. But you can be 100% sure that if it's a high quality producer that doesn't need to produce this very specific style of wine in New Zealand, in Marlborough, then he or she will use the natural yeast because it gets a more complex wine, I think. And then they can, maybe they add some cultured yeast just to control the fermentation or whatever. It's more risky business to work like this. I get it. I completely get it. So then I asked the producer, so which type of aging do you do? Do you age in stainless steel? Do you age in new oak? Do you age in old big oak or whatever? Because, at least to me, I think new oak, small new oak barrels, they tend to take over,
Cover
the aromas of the grapes or the DNA of the grapes. So I tend not to like wines which are aged in a big proportion of new oak.
So this is about the barrel aging?
Yeah, all sort of production, what happens, you know? And then maybe do you filter your wines? Do you fine your wines? So just another tip for the consumer in the supermarket, if your wine says vegan, then it's because they don't fine the wine. Because when you fine your wine...
You can use bentonite.
Huh?
You can use bentonite.
Yeah, you can use bentonite, but also you tend to use egg yolk, right? No?
Yes.
So that's another marketing thing. You know, it tends to confuse. So, yeah.
Okay, I get it. So let's say they work organically in the vineyard. They told me. And I've seen them. There's bees and flowers and everything. Good sign. They told me that they treated the grapes right, and they maybe use just a bit of sulfur. They ferment spontaneously.
Yeah.
The indigenous yeast, they use big oak or at least steel tanks to just keep the primary aromas and all this stuff.
Cement X and whatever they can use. Yeah.
And then they just sulfur as much as needed to bottle.
Yeah, some producers, they don't even sulfur. So I have respect for producers who actually make experiments. So they have one bottling without added sulfur before bottling. So without added sulfur at any stage. You have to remember, wines, when they ferment, they create sulfur.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it's a byproduct of the fermentation. So that's why on every bottle of wine it says contains sulfites. Yes. You cannot get a bottle without this. Or maybe you can. Maybe there's one or two examples in the world. But so the wines have natural sulfites. And I'm not against using sulfites, but I'm against using sulfites just because standard procedure, we just add sulfites.
It's easier, yeah.
So I think in most people in the natural wine business, they tend to say, okay, we can add maybe up to 40 milligrams per liter or something of sulfites. But what happens to me when you add too much sulfites is that it puts like a blanket over your wine.
That's
so it loses all of its identity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I was heading to is, even if I have those 5-6 steps I follow, the wines can still be shit. So how do I figure out when I'm lower involved in wine drinking, because I can figure out I like this or I don't like this, and this should be my main focus always. But how do I get if this wine is faulty or not, especially if I have no clue of faults?
Then many times probably you will not get it,
mm-hmm.
and you will enjoy the wine,
mm-hmm.
and everybody's happy. But so, if we were talking about faulty wines, it's another discussion. But for instance, volatile acidity in some amounts, personally I find intriguing. But if it's too much, then of course it's a fault. It's about I think it's about unconscious winemaking. So if we're thinking about natural winemakers that they just sit around and do nothing in the cellar, that's not true. They're just not. They are not adding things. Maybe
It's way riskier. I guess they sweat way more than normal winemakers do.
I'm sure they do. Yeah, because they cannot just add
Leave it alone.
a bucket of sulfites and then say it's going to be the same as last year.
Yeah.
And that's also we have to maybe think about our interpretation of wines. How should they taste? It's a living product, right? So should it necessarily taste the same every year, or should it actually taste of the vintage? Should it taste of the several challenges that the winemaker had during the year? And I must say, I've been working and visiting a lot of producers working this way. Time of harvest, they're just a shell of themselves. So they're so nervous and so anxious, and it's because it's a living product, right?
Yeah, sure. They want to get the best out of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, you touched this topic, so maybe 3-4 sentences on that. We have wine faults. For example, you mentioned volatile acidity. So if the listeners don't know that, it's the smell you also get when you open a bottle of balsamico. So it smells a bit sour. So even though we cannot smell this, but we have the intent of smelling it. It's a bit biting in the nose. In small amounts, this can be even part of a wine style. In Piedmont, we have this sometimes. And another thing is Brettanomyces. There is wine styles in Northern Rhone, for example, where it's just, oh yeah, this is bread, love it. But this is, even in small amounts, it's totally fine. But then there is faults we cannot discuss about. It's just faulty. And no matter how deep you are into wine, you drink it and you just want to spit it out again. So where do we draw the line? Where my personal taste is? Or...
Yeah, so I think we should always do it by where's the personal taste. But if your wine is close to being vinegar, so this volatile acidity you were talking about, is also wine has one place it wants to go. Once after opening, it's vinegar. So
always.
Yeah, and it's because of the oxidation in the wine. So and if the wines, if it's all about vinegar in the wine, it has masked all the aromas. You can't get anything out of it. Then of course it's a fault, and most people would get this. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. So a little bit of Brettanomyces, to me, it can enhance a complexity of a wine. And actually, if you some of the most expensive wines I've had, which are very few. I don't have much money, but they all tend to have a bit of Brettanomyces.
Gigal.
Gigal, yeah, definitely. But also some of the very expensive Burgundy and Barolo and all these kinds of wines.
How would you describe it? Just
Brettanomyces. Yeah. So you have this barnyard smell. You have maybe this rustic. So it tastes a little bit like animal skin. Cows. You say cow saddle, right? Or horse saddle.
Horse saddle.
Not cow saddle. You don't sit on the cow, right?
I don't know.
No?
Maybe in Denmark.
And this very, it feels like we're on the countryside, and yeah, many biodynamically grown wines, they tend to have this. Also, if the winemaker doesn't add a hell amount of sulfur, yes. But to me, in a quite big amount, I still enjoy the wine.
But this is personal taste, right?
Yeah, this is personal taste, definitely. And most wines we find on the supermarket shelf, they don't have this because it has been prevented, or it has been, you use sulfur and then, yeah,
it's gone.
So we also have this fault called mousiness, which is normally just a term we use for the so-called natural wines. And I'm still not sure what causes it. I'm pretty sure it's something about lactic bacteria or something, and then some oxidation. But many studies have been done, and very, very few conclusions have been done. So it's not very well documented. But when you used to drink these wines, and you get this fault, it's like a textural thing. You feel an animal in your mouth.
Yeah, like chewing a mouth.
Exactly,
Or
exactly. Some
fur.
people say also it has a bit of salami kind of texture and taste, and that to me, it's definitely a fault to me. And it's about, as far as I know, it's about pH levels. So you cannot smell it; you can only taste it. So if your mouth has a higher or lower pH level than the wine, blah blah blah, then you're more prone to taste it. So it can also be in different amounts. But if a wine is oxidized, I think it's a fault. I don't think it's up for discussion. Yeah,
I guess this is also a personal taste thing, because some people like this oxidative smell. And the weird thing is, and this I learned while we were studying WSET together, there's a difference between oxidized wine and oxidative winemaking.
exactly.
You know, and some people even don't get this because they're not involved that much. But I guess this will take us too far. But we agree.
I think it is important just to say that oxidative winemaking, that's an intentionally made oxidative wine.
Yes.
While oxidated wine is
Not intended normally.
no, no, it's not.
That's a good description.
So there are regions around the world who specializes in these oxidative wines, where it's intentionally. Yeah.
Okay. So if I make mousy wine by intention, it's a good thing?
I definitely don't think so. No.
Okay. I guess nobody wants to do that.
Most winemakers I have talked to says that mousiness is bad winemaking. But it's very very it's not well documented, so it's a difficult thing to talk about. But if you're an experienced drinker, you have no doubt when you get it.
And once I had an interview with a winemaker on a fair, can't remember when and where, and he said, if we have a wine that has mouse, we don't put it on the market because we don't want to. But we discovered that there's people in Japan who cannot taste it, or who don't care or even like it, so they just export it to Japan.
Yeah, I think that's a thing many producers do. So it's called segmentation of your market.
Yes, so the crappy stuff to Asia.
No,
really? Normally it's vice versa.
It happens in Copenhagen as well. Some wine bars, they tend to get these bottles and they serve it by the glass, and the people who come to the wine bar, they don't know shit about wine, which is totally fine. And they don't care, and they enjoy the wine because, this is natural wine. It's supposed to be like wild and very very oxidized, volatile. It has mouse, blah blah blah. So that's why. Yeah, and this is why the word natural wine seems to also
have a bad reputation.
Definitely to many people, because they think that it's supposed to be like this, you know. Oh, it's natural wine, then it's an excuse for making shit wines.
Yeah, it's not.
No, that's how it was maybe 10 years ago. But today, natural wines are, some of the best classical wines, they're made more or less naturally. They don't have mouse, they don't have over-exaggerated amount of volatile acidity or oxidation or whatever.
Okay. We should definitely have a second part of this conversation in the future.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
A pleasure. Yeah. Absolutely amazing. So safe travels back to Copenhagen.
Thank you.
See you very soon.
Yeah, see you.